Hi everyone. So here we're going to be discussing breaks in the headline. Now, what the headline is our mental computational power. The longer, the deeper, the clearer the line, the stronger, the deeper, the more complex somebody's thought process is going to be. The headline is the line that runs along the center of the palm, the lower transverse crease. And it shows our ability to process, assimilate, how we understand information coming from the outside world, and it shows what type of thinker that we are. It shows our train of thought and our cognitive process. So when there's a break in the headline, it's going to affect all of these things. And depending on how the break is formed, it's going to affect the person differently. Let's have a look. So this is the first hand we're going to look at that's got a break in the headline, and this is quite a typical way in which you'll see a break occur. What happens is that you've got one part of the headline and then there's this little gap, and then the headline continues at maybe a slightly different angle, and in this case it's slightly elevated. So the way this break is going to affect this person is it means that her headline is divided into two different sections. She's got the first section, which is the short headline, which functions as her very practical, materially driven person who focuses in the here and now. And then you've got the second part of the headline, which is the part of her that's more philosophical, there's going to be more deep thinking, and is going to be looking more into the future and planning things further ahead. Now, the challenge with this person is because there's a break in the line, it means that these two different sides of her personality are going to be expressing themselves at different times. Part of her is going to feel very drawn to sorting out the practical, being very present, doing all the things that organise her life right now that make it more comfortable and such. But then post-break, the second part of the headline shows that she is going to be considering things more deeply, thinking further into the future, wanting to make better long-term decisions, and isn't going to be as practically minded and materially driven as what the first headline suggests. Now, as we know, whenever there's a break in the headline, it shows a discontinuity in the person's thought process. So it is going to always make a little bit of confusion. It means that it's not going to be a clear, linear process of thinking through something in a clear way whenever it needs to be done. And what typically occurs when you see this kind of pattern is that chronologically, when somebody is in the middle of this break, it can be a very, very confusing time. They can not know exactly what to think about things, find it very hard to see past the immediate circumstances. However, when they transition past this break, they have a totally different change and outlook on life. They see things very differently. All of a sudden, things that weren't so important suddenly become very important. They start to look at life more philosophically, more broadly, and they become a much more deeper person. And this is because they're now stepping into the longer part of the headline. And looking at the next hand, this is another very good example of this same similar type of break where there's a little bit of an overlap in the changing headlines. This is quite a complicated hand actually, because you've got the emotion line that's pretty much cutting right into the headlines and sort of forming a simian line over here. However, if we sort of disentangle that emotion line, we can see that there are two headlines here, and there are two because there's a break in the middle of them. So it's quite a subtle little small break, but you can definitely start to see the importance of this when you analyse the headline. So what this break shows is that when you look at the headline as a whole, including the break, it means that the thought process isn't going to be always clear. There's going to be this stutter, there's going to be this discontinuity in the way in which the person can think. But like the previous hand, if we break it down chronologically, you get the same similar, very interesting pattern, which is this big shift and change in a person's personality after the break occurred. Now, this was a man who had a very normal job and was very materially driven and wanted to make a lot of money and work very hard. He's got quite a fiery hand. But When he passed this period in his life and moved into the second part of the headline after this break, a radical transformation occurred in his personality, and he became very interested and obsessed with spirituality, philosophy, finding meaning in life, looking for bigger things, and totally rejected his old way of being, which was much more materially driven. He actually ended up joining a spiritual sect and become incredibly passionate about this, and has completely changed his entire way of thinking. So when this break occurred in his headline, this is a complete transformation of his personality. It was a very difficult period for him because it's kind of like the whole world completely changes and his perceptions on everything are totally thrown out the window, and he sees the world in a completely different light. So whenever you see a shift and a break in a headline like this and somebody has passed it already, they always know exactly what it is you're talking about when you talk about this change and this transformation, because it is literally like they're stepping into a new personality. They used to live this other life and see the world in this way, which is the shorter headline manner, but then after this shift, they become much, much more complex in the way they view things, and they start to see life in a completely different way and essentially totally change their personality. Okay, so looking at the next hand, this is a really clear, obvious break in the headline. So as always, this is going to affect somebody's thought process. Now, when there is a big break like this in the headline, what it means is that somebody's train of thought, somebody's mental thought projection cannot be as concise as what they would ideally like. This is because there's a big shift, there's a big break. Now, when this is the case, it means that somebody can be thinking through something, but then they can't quite get to the solution. They can't quite take their mind to that point that is going to bring clarity or going to bring insight into whatever it is that they're delving into mentally. Because of this break, it's kind of like the thought process will suddenly shut off. And then what they have to do is they have to kind of work hard to get it back on track and sort of find their way through to the end of something. Because this is a very full hand, which means that we can see lots of different lines everywhere. And if we look at the end of the headline, there's lots of different tangents and lots of different thought processes. It means that this person is going to be very mentally active. They're going to be doing lots of thinking, and there's a potential for lots of anxieties and lots of worries as well with all of this thought. So when there's a break in the headline and you've got it on a very busy hand like this, making sure stress is minimized becomes essential. This person could be much more prone to stress than other types, and working out ways in which they can be physical, they can be active and take all this energy away from their mind and place it into their body and work with it in a productive way is going to be really helpful. What that also does as well is it will give the mind a little bit of rest, because if she is trying to think through a situation or think through a problem and she can't quite get to it because of the break in the headline, this is going to be frustrating, and it's going to cause more tension, which of course a hand like this doesn't want. So really working out ways in which to relax, wind down and give peace to the mind and allow the mind to find clarity in its own time without forcing it is really good advice for this type of hand. And here we have another headline pattern. Now, although this could be contrived as a break, I personally wouldn't necessarily think of it like that, because the lines are sufficiently overlapping for me that this would be seen as a second headline or an additional headline. But I'm putting it here because on first impression, when you look at it, it could be seen as a break. So what we've got here is the first headline that's very much attached to the lifeline and a little bit shorter. And then above it, we've got this separate functioning, higher, more elevated headline. Now, this shows two different sides to the person's personality again. And the first headline, we can see it's quite tied in to the lifeline, which shows a sense of conformity, somebody who could be quite shy. But this second headline, which isn't attached and it's above the other headline, shows this other side to her personality that's going to come out in certain situations. It's this more performer-esque part of her. It's the more artistic, certainly the more spiritual, the more esoteric-minded person. And this is a lady who confesses to be very shy, quite conservative and quite conformist, and is very influenced by her parents and things like this. However, when she has had a few drinks at a party, she says she absolutely loves to be the life and soul of what's going on. She also loves to dance, and explains that when she does this, it is like a different side of her personality. She gets to be a performer, she gets to come alive. Equally, she says that she really likes writing, and this is quite common when you see somebody with this type of headline, because when somebody can write and get into a different stream of consciousness, it gives them access to this other mind and this other personality that they don't typically have access to. So they can very often be very, very creative and come up with stuff that they wouldn't at all conceive when they're functioning from the other headline. Okay, and finally I wanted to look at this hand here. So here we've got another clear break in the headline. Now, a break in the headline can be quite a deleterious factor. It means that somebody can certainly be much more stressed. They can have a lot more mental confusion, and they can find it very, very hard to understand or to comprehend why certain things are occurring in their lives and to them. This is certainly the case with this person here. He was a young chap and he was very, very distressed. He'd sort of left his family for a little bit. He'd come to have a break and a holiday, but he was kind of borderline alcoholic and was just basically very, very confused. This can occur with quite a big break in a headline like this because somebody hasn't got this coherent way of thinking and seeing things. And especially when chronologically they are in this period where the break occurs, it's just very, very hard for them to feel like they know themselves, like they understand what's going on, and that they can think through and understand anything about their environment or why certain things are occurring to them. So when you see a break on a line like this and it's clearly affecting somebody, it's clearly affecting the way in which they're functioning mentally, and it could be something that could be leading towards a breakdown or something. These breaks can be very, very severe and really affect somebody. What is important is that you always advise them not to be pouring more energy into mentally trying to analyze and work things out. When the headline is not functioning properly, like it isn't doing here, putting more thought into it is like trying to run on a broken leg. It's just going to make things worse. So what you want to do is you want to give this person space in the mind. You want to get them to be putting their energy elsewhere and making their life as simple as possible. Their mind is going to be massively complicating things here. It's going to be very, very confused, and their perception of reality isn't going to be quite coherent. They're not going to be able to project far into the future. They're not going to be able to understand why they're doing what they're doing and things like this. So you want to make everything very, very simple. This person needs to be doing a bit of work. They've got a fire hand. They appreciate being active. They want to be doing something physical. They've got grainy skin. So you want to be advising them to doing all of the most basic things, which are going to put their energy into something productive, which will then give the mind time to go through this quite big, important transitional period for them, which will hopefully then bring them back to some sense of coherence. Okay everyone, thank you for watching the video. If you have any questions, please pop them in the comments box and I will try and get back to you.